Hello, it's Brother Juro, YouTube philosopher, and today we talk about leadership and the parallel of leadership between a man and woman in the context of family is quite the same as what we see in the story. There's two stories in the Bible that I want to focus on. The first story is the story of Joseph, and Joseph becomes prime minister of Egypt, and it was on account of his ability to interpret dreams as well as his talents of being a organizer and a manager of men. Because the Pharaoh during the time of Joseph's living had a dream, and he had it twice, and the dream troubled him. It troubled him so much that he called in all of the wise men of Egypt, all of the magicians of Egypt, to see if they can give him understanding of this dream. Because being the king, things that happen to the king are very troublesome, and especially if this king becomes very focused and obsessed with understanding what's going on. And so, as it turns out, Joseph had already demonstrated the power of being able to interpret people's dreams while a prisoner in Pharaoh's jail. And it was during the time that he was a prisoner that he was able to show the prison guards that he was a very capable and efficient manager of men. And so he became a trustee of the jail's Pharaoh. And ultimately he was brought before Pharaoh to interpret the dream. And he gives an accurate interpretation. 7 years of prosperity, Pharaoh, followed by 7 years of famine. Well, who are we going to get to help manage this project of storing up all of this grain and supplies during this 7 years of prosperity in anticipation of the 7 years of famine? Well, man, who better than this trustee of the jails, because he's shown knowledge and skill on how to keep a prison in order. He's shown, even before he got thrown in jail, that he can manage even an Egyptian general's household, because he got thrown in jail as a result of being falsely accused of doing some wrong at his master Potiphar's house. So they entrust Joseph with being the prime minister of Egypt and taking on this food storage project. And ultimately, Egypt becomes the world power and the place where everybody goes to get their food, their sustenance. And ultimately, a new Pharaoh comes on the scene who doesn't remember Joseph or how Joseph and his Hebrew people, him being a Hebrew, came and saved Egypt. And because he didn't want to remember the history and appreciate the Hebrew people for their contribution in saving Egypt, in saving the world, this new Pharaoh enslaved the Hebrews. And the Hebrews cried out to God, "God, save us." And God raises up a prophet, Moses. And Moses, brings these plagues to Pharaoh. And ultimately Pharaoh gives in to let the Hebrew people go. Now, the thing about this is that the Hebrews, all during both circumstances, they believed in God. But they forgot about God, just as Pharaoh forgot about the contributions that the Hebrews made in making Egypt the great world power that it had become. And then it reached a point where the Hebrews had to believe on God, and that after performing these wonderful miracles, they had to take steps to get out of Egypt, to go to a place where they could be free. But they weren't going to just be free. They were going to be free to serve God. And God had already given them the blessing of freedom to walk out of bondage. So too today, the black family, the black man, the black woman, we are free. We can believe in God or not. It's at a point now where we're not even really believing in God. We know God exists. Well, that's it. We believe in God, but we're not believing on him. Because if we believed on him, so many things in the black community wouldn't be going on, like premarital sex, fornication, just creates so many other bondages, so many other entanglements that we're ensnared. But the thing is, believing on God means that you're going to take him at his word. You're going to start doing the things that he tells you to do. And, we can look up the 10 Commandments with our smartphones to see exactly what God wants us to do and what he wants us not to do. Because the 10 Commandments is not just a list of prohibitions. It's a list of commandments, things that you are encouraged to do. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me, and you shall serve me. And you will do this by remembering to keep the Sabbath day holy. Set it apart and use it as a day of rest and recollection of just how great a God I am. And then he gives you a list of things that have to deal with people. Now, the funny thing is, once you get the first 2 in order, doing the other 8 should be pretty easy to do. But we first have to believe not just in him, but we have to believe on him. And he's told us what we need to do. And so here it was, these people are stepping out of Egypt, and they're on their way to the promised land. And they weren't just walking with Moses because Moses said so. Moses demonstrated power and authority to prove to these people that he was truly sent by God. And not only did they witness this demonstration, but the pagan Egyptians saw it as well. So we have a story in the Bible where we see God demonstrating his power and authority. And now it's just a matter of the reader believing on God and him not lying to you about this story. And understanding that there's a spiritual level of understanding that has to be reached also in hearing this historical story. And so these people had to walk out of Egypt to go to a place where they would be free to worship and serve God as God had purposed them to do from the beginning. And so they're wandering and they're griping and moaning, complaining, and they're just really not trying to get into this relationship with God. They're trying to just be fed. They're trying to live. And ultimately, it culminates with them arriving at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God is up at the top of the mountain waiting for Moses to come up so he can get the final instructions before heading off directly into the promised land. Now, during this time that Moses has walked up to the top of the mountain, these people lose their patience. They haven't made it to the promised land, but they are literally in God's presence. They're literally in his presence. And they're about to get their instructions before going in. And what do? Now, these aren't Egyptians. These are not godless Egyptians. These are God-aware Hebrews. And what do? They build a golden calf, and they have a great orgy at the bottom of the mountain right before God. You shall have no other gods before me. You know, that before, you can look at it in two ways. You shall not have anything before me in my presence, or you shall not have anything that interferes with me and you dealing with each other directly. But it broke down to where they had an orgy. They were worshiping this calf and they were lusting out on each other. But these were not Egyptians, people. Pay attention to the story. They weren't even Egyptians. They were Hebrews. And they took their wicked behaviors to a whole nother level because they're doing it right in God's presence. They took it to a whole nother level. You know, they went closer to God than the Egyptians currently are. In geographic location, they were closer to God than the Egyptians, but they were doing far worse things. So too, this is what's been happening in the black community. We've gotten so far away from God, but God is so close to us. His word is in every church. We got a church on every corner. We got Bibles in our homes, but they're just collecting dust. They're used as paperweights or something to prop up something else. They're just not giving us the real value that we need to enjoy. But the long and the short of it, getting back to the story, the people who walked out of Egypt into the wilderness, to the foot of that mountain, they never got to see the promised land. They died in the wilderness, but it was their children that got to see the promised land. They arrived, and they arrived with those instructions that were given to their parents at the foot of the mount. They were given a leader named Joshua who was going to put in work. They were all going to have to put in some work. They were going to have to exercise discipline in one, getting the people that were occupying the promised land out, and then to organize their nation to control that land. And these are the things that we're not seeing. And this is the reason why the black authority doing the work that he's doing is not going to succeed. That's why the black women that he's commending as being, marriage material and the type of woman that we need to have in the black community, that's why those women will remain husbandless. And if they do get a husband, they're not going to be happy with him because he's not going to be the leader that they need him to be in order for to receive a blessing. So with that, I just think this message is long enough, and I think I made my point very clear, and I think that those people who are willing to think and think clearly will see and get the blessing that this message will definitely be for them. So with that, I depart. Peace and blessings to you all.